Marjorie just
Oh,
got here
is she
right
back?
on time. Yeah. You hear her mewling in the background. She's like, are we
Yes.
recording, Mommy? Podcast time?
She's like, you didn't invite me.
Come on. Oh my gosh. She's coming right over. Here she is. Marjorie, say something.
Hi, Marjorie.
Hmm? No, now she's not interested. She's like, I don't want to be in your stupid podcast.
She's suddenly microphone shy. Amazing. Marjorie, the new host for Didn't Read It. I'm going to resign.
Books. Books. Books.
Hello and welcome to Didn't Read It, the podcast that would rather be paid in gallons of wine. I am your host, Grace Todd, writer, editor, and book gremlin. And I am joined again today by our official pilgrimage correspondent and general gal about Chaucer, Toni DiNardo. Hi, Toni.
Hi, Grace. I'm glad to be back.
So excited to have you. Would you like to reintroduce yourself?
Yeah, I am Toni DiNardo. I am a doctoral candidate in English at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm actually now officially ABD as of last week, which is horrifying because it means I have to write that D. I study Middle English romance and modern mass medievalisms and fantasy literature, and I'm an old friend of Grace's, here to regale you about the horrors of Chaucer.
And the triumphs and joys of Chaucer. There are good things too. I am confidently assured by some people.
I'm going to be honest, Grace, this is not going to be a very triumphant and joyous episode.
Oh no. All right. Well, for those of us who have Chaucer trauma, I don't know, buckle up, settle in, hold tight to something or someone that you love. Well, Toni, I'm so excited about your progress towards your dissertation, even if you are maybe slightly less excited.
Yeah, everyone seems to be really excited. My committee, my partner, they seem to be missing the bit where, I then have to write a dissertation, which I'm less excited about, but they're like, oh, you're going to do great. You did great on the other stuff. And they don't seem to be convinced by the argument of, but what if I don't this time?
You're like, you guys have committed me to writing a book. You realize that, right? That's hard. And maybe I'm just a baby girl and shouldn't have to write a book.
Yeah.
Have we considered this as an option?
I told my other partner, I was like, oh yeah, one of my committee members was like, Toni, I think one of the things that's really great about your writing is that anyone who sits down to read it is going to enjoy it. There's always something for someone. And I'm like, wow, I can't believe I have pulled the wool over the eyes of these 5 well-respected career academics. They're like, have you considered that maybe you're just a good writer? Have you considered that maybe you're just a good writer? No, of course not.
You were like, at best, I am a trickster goddess, and I have fooled all of you, but that's as good as it's getting. I know the feeling.
The great thing, though, I'm on spring break now, and the first chapter I'm writing is about medievalisms in Game of Thrones. And so for once, I get to not feel bad about how I'm spending my spring break because I'm not doing anything. I'm not working. But I've been rewatching Game of Thrones, so I'm doing research. I'm hard at work. House of the Dragon's coming out in June, and I have an excuse to just be like, sorry, can't write. I have to watch the material. I've got to do my research. This is my primary source.
It's very important. I remember feeling extremely clever when I was in school anytime I managed to write a paper that involved a movie. Just yeah, this is very important, and I'm going to watch Sorry to Bother You 16 times.
Yeah, the wild thing is, like, then you get to grad school and everyone's like, yeah, that's fine. Like, do whatever you want. Just do it good. I've got a chapter on video games. I'm going to talk about Kingdom Come Deliverance and why Nazis liked it so much. Like,
That sounds cool. I want to read that.
I don't want to write it.
Well, I'm sorry. I was going to say, I'm so sorry, but you've now made your dissertation sound interesting, and now I want to read it. So I'm going to join the legion of people telling you that, unfortunately, you are going to have to actually write it.
I don't know why you all hate me so much.
We're just here to make you suffer so that you will make good content for us. In many ways, actually. And that's why I'm so glad to have you back on the podcast.
Yes, let's talk about Chaucer, the thing that I did this week to distract myself from writing. I put together so many notes.
Let's do it.
So.
All right. Take us on a journey.
Yeah. Okay, so today we're going to talk about Fragment 2 and Fragment 3. And Fragment 2 is just one story. It's the Man of Law's tale. So the Man of Law, or the Sergeant of the Law, as he's described in the general prologue, is a character that I find interesting because, like, he's one of the only characters in the general prologue that Chaucer genuinely describes in mostly positive terms. Like, there's a little sarcasm, but it's mostly not sarcastic. It's mostly not ironic. He's an older, experienced lawyer. He's a judge in the courts of assize, which are the, like, traveling royal courts that try things that would be like felonies nowadays. He's described as war and wise, full rich of excellence, discreet and of great reverence. In a way that, like, Chaucer doesn't do this thing like he does with the knight, where he describes him as very, like, gentle and perfect, and then is also, like, also he's got bloodstains under his tabard. The Man of Law is largely what he appears.
Right.
He's a prominent landowner, which, like, tells us that he is very successful as a lawyer, because, like, owning land is the be-all end-all of being successful in medieval England.
Yeah, that's a biggie in, like, a feudal society.
Exactly, yeah. No, exactly. Like, owning land. Like, land is the only real thing of worth that people own. Even, like, coinage is sort of backed by money in the king's possession. But, like, land is this thing that, like, to own a little bit of land is to own a little piece of the king's sovereignty.
Yeah. Okay. So that's he's a very impressive lawyer then.
Yeah, and, like, the really the, like, one critique that Chaucer offers is he's like, oh, he knows a lot about the law, he can quote it, he's always very busy. He's maybe a little less busy than he acts like he is. Like, he makes himself look even busier than he is.
We all know that dude.
Yeah, oh god. I mean, I think he's basically just describing, like, every, like, corporate executive who, like, yeah, maybe you've got a lot of meetings and whatnot, but, like, also, do you not spend some time, like, just playing putt-putt in your office? Like...
Yeah, just really enjoying presenting themselves as being martyred to work.
Exactly. And one of the things about that and about the general description of the Man at Law is that there is this verisimilitude and this specificity to the way the character is described that has generally led scholars to believe that he is modeled on a real person.
Ooh.
And there are two people who really get put forward. The one who actually has the strongest evidence is a judge named Thomas Pinchbeck, who was an assize judge and an officer of the Exchequer. He actually at one point signed a warrant for Chaucer's arrest over an unpaid debt.
Whoop.
And he was wealthy, a landowner, well known for dressing well. There's also a bit when the sergeant is being described, the sergeant at law is being described in the general prologue. The poem says, there could no wicht pinch at his writing. And so some people have suggested that pinch is a play on Pinchbeck.
Okay.
The other one that gets suggested some is John Gower, who we talked about last time, who was another poet. He wrote Confessio Amantis, he wrote Vox Clementis. He was known to Chaucer. They were probably friends, but at least Chaucer trusted Gower enough that when he was in Italy on one of his diplomatic trips. He left Gower in charge of his estate. And some people have also suggested Gower because the Man of Law's tale, which we'll get into in a minute, is the same story as the tale of Constance that appears in Confessio Amantis.
Oh.
The problem with the identification with Gower is that, like, Gower showed an interest in the law and seemed to know a lot about the law, but it's actually very unclear whether he was actually a lawyer.
Oh.
There's no evidence to suggest that he ever studied at one of the Inns of Court or that he was a lawyer.
Has anyone suggested that maybe it's like a composite character of both of those dudes?
Yes, yeah. And there are a few other figures who've been suggested as composites. There's also the suggestion that it's actually a stand-in for Chaucer, who was a lawyer. There's a suggestion that he was a stand-in for, like, literary critics who were critical of Chaucer's use of rhyme, because, like, there is a bit in which the Man of Law says that he is going to tell his tale without rhyming like Chaucer does. Like, literally references Chaucer, because remember, Chaucer is a character in the narrative as well.
Right.
He then proceeds to tell a story that is rhymed, which leads to, like, questions about, like, whether he was originally going to tell a different tale, or no one really knows.
I like how many of these questions are like, did Chaucer just like, was he just like an inconsistent motherfucker, or did he do this on purpose to be funny?
Yeah, no.
Question mark.
And I feel like, for whatever reason, because Chaucer is, like, one of the greats, we love to always assume that it's some great, brilliant reason. But, like, with the number of people in the company, for instance, at the beginning of the general prologue, like, I am sorry, I just want to believe he f***ed up. Like, just let me believe he did it stupid. Like,
He just made a whoopsie doodle, you know? We lost a few people along the way, and he was going to explain it. He was like, oh yeah, 6 of them got murdered by bandits, but, like, we'll do that at the end. And then he just never got around to it.
He's just like me. He writes stupid things that don't make sense, and I can't explain them.
He's just like me for real. All right, so we've got the lawyer.
So the other thing that is kind of interesting about this story, in terms of, like, situating it, like, where does it take place in the narrative, and why most scholars agree with its placement early in the narrative, even if that weren't where it was placed in the Ellesmere manuscript, is that while it doesn't have a connection to the other tales, like some tales within Fragments do, it's the only tale in its fragment, it does have a timestamp, in that Harry Bailey, they're walking along, and Harry Bailey, the host of the Tabard Inn, is like, I'm looking at the sky, I'm just making some casual, off-the-cuff astronomical calculations. And then he proceeds to, like, give a bunch of calculations that would have required, like, almanacs and, like, a sextant and, like, all of these things. He's like, because Aries is at this position in the zenith of the azimuth, I don't know anything about astronomy, and the shadow of a 6-foot-tall man is 6 feet long. This is an actual thing that he says. I can tell that it is 10 a.m. on the 18th of April. So, like, he gives us, it's just an off-the-cuff calculation.
Sure, totally.
He's like, all right, well, anyway, time's a-wasting, y'all. So, like, Mr. Lawyer Man, tell us a story.
It sounds like when Marvel movies need you to believe someone is a scientist and that they're smart, and they're just going to rattle off a bunch of, like, things that don't make any sense but sound complicated, and you're like, okay, cool.
Yeah. He's Goodwill Hunting. He's just, like, casually solving the, like, fancy math problem on the board.
Chaucer, but in Boston accents.
Chaucer.
Chaucer.
So the Man of Law is, he's a very upstanding and moral man. This is another thing that actually sometimes gets used to suggest that he's Gower, because Gower is often read as this very moralistic person, which doesn't entirely square to me with how obsessed he is in Confessio Amantis with brothers and sisters having sex, but that's...
Okay.
Who am I to disagree with history? So the Man of Law tells an upstanding moral tale. And it is a tale that, together with Gower's Tale from Confessio Amantis, part of Nicholas Trevet's Chronicles, and then a number of smaller stories around the same time, all form what is known as the Constance cycle. So Constance is the daughter of the Roman emperor in... it's not specified what emperor or when. It's also presumably, when we say the Roman emperor, what we probably mean is the Byzantine emperor, because this is happening at the same time as the Sultan exists. Though at the same time, one of the things that's like tricky is at the end of the story, she is in Rome. You know, this is, it's a little wackadoo, it's a little all over the place. But she's the daughter of the Roman emperor, and she is so beautiful that the Sultan, who has heard of her beauty, agrees to convert to Christianity in order to marry her, which pisses off his mother because now he's an apostate. So she does what any mother would do if her son married someone she didn't want him to, and she has him and the entire wedding party killed and puts puts Constance in a boat with no crew and sends her out to sea.
Why not just murder Constance?
I don't know. Who knows why mothers-in-law do anything.
This is fair.
So this is the start of just like a kind of comical series of misadventures for Constance. And it always reminds me, did you watch Downton Abbey?
Right up until they killed off what's-his-face, and it was just too melodramatic and I gave up.
So you're at least familiar with how like every season it's like, what new horrible thing can we do to Bates and Anna, right? Like,
yeah.
Julian Fellows, like, just, it's like every season it's like, what if this season he's like throwing like darts at a dartboard that has Bates and Anna on one side, and then it's like, oh, okay, what if Bates plunk got murdered plunk by a ravenous walrus plunk. And then we're meant to like feel for Bates and Anna though, because we're like, but they're so good. All these horrible things keep happening to them, and they stay happy and cheerful and good. And so that's Constance. Like,
okay,
her ship crashes on the coast of Northumbria in the north of England, where she like very quickly is framed for murder, but then rescued by a miracle in which the like person accusing her of murder, who's the actual murderer, is like struck down by lightning or whatever. She ends up impressing and marrying the king of Northumbria, Aella.
Like you do.
Which pisses off his mother, who has Constance banished again. So, like, mothers-in-law are not good in this story. Mothers-in-law bad. So now she runs around.
At least she doesn't kill her son this time.
She does not. She doesn't kill her son. Aella lives until the end of the story. Sort of. Actually, he doesn't. But she doesn't kill him. She banishes Constance to sea again, though. Or rather, she, I think, maybe tricks Aella into banishing him to sea, or banishing her to sea. So she drifts around again a little bit, praying like a good Christian all the time. And she runs aground in Spain this time, where she is almost immediately almost raped.
Oh.
Before the rapist is then, like, also struck by lightning, I think, or swept into the sea or something like that.
Okay. Sure.
Then she gets a job as a maid with the Earl of Grant, with a Roman senator. And then that Roman senator happens to be in the city when Aella comes to do this, like, sad widower pilgrimage to Rome, finds her and is like, oh my god, my love, you're alive. We're reunited for like a year until Aella dies. And then Constance's son becomes the Emperor of Rome because she was so pious and good and Christian.
Ooh.
Because like that's really the important thing. Is Constance doesn't whine through any of this. She is constant. She is constant Constance. She's always like, God's grace is with me and I shall not whine, because what kind of terrible harridan would whine about being set adrift at sea like twice and almost raped and accused of murder, and like what fault could I have with God?
What possible complaint could I make about my series of homicidal mothers-in-law? Really? I
Yeah,
mean, I could have it so much worse.
God will provide.
It just starts to feel snotty at a certain point where you're like, I can hear the tone. You're just like, don't worry about me. I'll just get murdered by another woman.
Yeah, Constance is a bit much. Now, the funny thing about the order in which the tales are usually presented when we're going by Ellesmere is that we're followed up by Constance with the beginning of Fragment 3, and a woman who I think most of us are much more fond of and relate to a lot more. The infamous wife of Bath.
Yay!
So the wife of Bath, Alison, actually, is her name, which I feel like is one of those. One, Chaucer, like, I think someone named Alison, like, snubbed Chaucer, and he was like, I'm just going to write characters named Alison, and I'm going to make them all just kind of a little slutty.
Uh-huh.
But I also like Allison. I love Allison because I think it's one of those things like the Tiffany effect. Allison is a medieval name, but if you named a character Allison in like a medieval fantasy book, people would be like, "Really, Allison? Allison and Tiffany? Really?"
Yeah, it just doesn't feel like
It's like watching Dune and
Paul. Oh.
yeah, Jessica.
Yeah, it is. It's funny how names do and don't travel forward through his. Like, I found out recently that Corey is apparently a biblical name, and I was like, really? Corey? Like 1980s? Like, we're all child actors, Corey? But all right, sure.
Yeah, I would have thought that Corey was like, I don't know, something like Braden that like middle-class white women just started naming their kids in the 90s.
Yeah, exactly.
So the wife of Bath, I think one of the things that I realized with the last episode that I was like, oh, I wanted to talk about this and we didn't get to it, but this is a good bit to get to it, is medieval pilgrimage is spring break. And when I say spring break, I mean like spring break woohoo. Like spring break, like going down to Malibu, show your tits.
Getting a tramp stamp.
Champagne baths.
Yeah.
This is part of why, like, in the book of Marjorie Kemp, like, this is part of why, like, Marjorie is, you know, not popular among the people she goes on pilgrimage with. She spends her whole time praying and weeping and being pious, and everyone's like, come on, like, we're trying to get drunk. And Allison is the perfect example of this. Like, she is a world globe-trotting pilgrim. She has been to Rome, she has been to Cologne, she's been to Jerusalem 3 times, and she is having fun.
She is here to party.
Yeah. She's been married 5 times. She's rich. She's a good church-going woman, but it's like made clear that like going to church is about like conspicuous consumption. Like she's got to be the first one up to the offering plate, and she's like wearing rich clothes. Like there's several sort of markers that are very like temporally bound. Her like head cloth that she wears to church is described as weighing 10 pounds.
Oh my God.
These like elaborate headdresses of just like wrapped cloth. Her stockings are very close fitting, which is difficult to do with the weaving of the time. They're also a fine scarlet red, which red is a very difficult color to accomplish with like natural dyes.
Okay. So she's a real housewife, is what you're telling me.
Yes. the Real Housewives of Bath.
Yes. Okay.
We're told that of remedies of love she knew perchance, for she could of that art the old dance. So she's she knows her way around wooing men.
I mean, well, you'd have to marry 5 times.
Yeah. And like she also she talks about how she's like always on the lookout for her next husband. She met her 5th husband when she was still married to her 4th husband. And I think she actually hits on one of the members of the party. I think the clerk maybe, because she's married to a clerk. And I think she's very like, you know, I've got an opening up soon.
She's like, well, I got rid of the first 5 pretty conveniently, so like, what up? Are you trying to be number 6? Lucky number 6? Hey, baby.
Exactly. The other thing that's kind of really interesting about The Wife of Bath is that no one actually really remembers her tale. Even the people who are like, oh yeah, I remember we read it in high school. Like, when you start asking them about it, what I find people actually remember is the prologue, which is the longest prologue by far in the Canterbury Tales, and it is twice the length of her actual tale.
Oh.
And it's this sort of long jocular treatise on the position of women in society and the imbalance between the sexes. So, like, she complains that men aren't judged for remarrying when their wives die, but widows who remarry are. Like, because again, keep in mind, she is a 4-time widow who has remarried every time.
She's like, suddenly people get mad when I do it 4 times.
Yeah, but men can do it. She complains that women are chastised for liking men as much as men like women, and she makes some interesting comments about like the value of virginity, and is basically like, if virginity is so good, why did God command us to marry and procreate instead of commanding us to be celibate?
Yeah.
She tells some stories about her exploits, which include smacking the shit out of her current husband for upsetting her. She also gives a fairly solid breakdown of some of the like doctrinal history of women's denigration in Christianity. Like, she talks about Saint Jerome and kind of talks about how the early church fathers like constructed as women as bad in Christianity and criticizes that.
Oh.
Her tale itself is pretty straightforward. And I was thinking to myself, it's almost the opposite. Do you remember that horrible movie from the 90s or the early aughts, Shallow Hal?
Yes. Which is not a thing I expected to come up today, but yeah.
Right, so, it's the thing, the guy gets cursed to see only inner beauty, and he falls in love with this beautiful woman, but she's actually, like, fat and ugly. Like, that's the whole joke, is just that she's fat.
Yeah, it's pretty gross.
So, in The Wife of Bath's tale, we have a knight of King Arthur's court who is convicted of raping a maiden.
No.
And he is sentenced to death, but Guinevere says, I will reprieve you if you go out into the world and you return within a year and a day. This is that classic medieval year and a day.
Mm-hmm.
With the answer to this question: what do women most desire? So I guess it's actually a combination of Shallow Hal and What Women Want.
I was going to say, wait a minute. So we've got Mel Brooks and Jack Black combining. Good. Lovely.
Was Jack Black in that?
Shallow Hal?
I don't know. I never saw the movie. I just know what it was about.
I think it was Jack Black because he's generally like a really lovely guy, and he apparently, after the fact, was like, yeah, that was a f***ed up movie, and I'm sorry I made it. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah. So he goes around and he asks women throughout the kingdom, and they all give him different answers. So he's like, I'm going to get beheaded. But then he comes into a glade full of beautiful dancing women who run away, and the only person who is left is this just powerfully ugly old woman.
Sure.
And she's like, I'll tell you what women want if you marry me. So he's like, all right, fine. Like, I don't want to get my head cut off. So they go to court, and she's like, yeah, what all women want is sovereignty over their husbands. And Guinevere's like, yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. You're not going to get your head chopped off today. The old lady's like, well, you said you're going to marry me, so marry me. So he does. But then, like, on their wedding night, he can't do the deed because, to reiterate, she's so ugly.
He can't even get it up. All right.
And she's like, let me level with you, kid. Because, like, I'm an old lady in a fairy tale, which obviously means that I'm a witch. I'm going to give you a choice. I can be ugly and old and look like this, but I'll be so loyal to you because, like, who'd want this? Or I can be a young, beautiful woman who's also probably a harlot. Your pick. What do you want? Your choice.
Oh. This feels like something that would be written by an incel in the year of our Lord 2023.
You know, there are some things I could say about Chaucer. But he's grown wise to the world, and he's wise to the ways of women. So he's like, you pick. What do you want to be?
Oh.
So, of course, he's rewarded for recognizing her sovereignty.
Clever boy.
By her turning into a beautiful woman who is also faithful to him.
What a lucky lad.
Yeah, so reverse shallow how. He accepts being married to the ugly woman, and she turns out to actually be beautiful.
Now, really quick, for the non-medievalists in the audience, when you say sovereignty over their husbands, do you mean in charge of? Like, I am your boss, I am your wife and your boss, or do you just mean they want sort of independence and more so like sovereignty over themselves? Does that make sense?
I think there's a little bit of both at play. I think one of the things that the tale itself is getting at is like women just want personal sovereignty. And there's actually in the asking of the question and his inability to find a single answer until he finds this old crone, there's kind of an answer in the asking. Like, why does everyone give a different answer to this question of like, what do women want? Because the answer is women want what they want. Women want to make their own choices. They want to be individuals and all that.
Right. They want to be asked.
But there's also an extent to which when we look at like the wife of Bath as a character in the prologue, there is maybe also the sense that like women want to be domineering and boss their husbands around. And that's where, like, one of the things about the Wife of Bath's tale is that it's been read at times as this sort of proto-feminist text, and I don't always agree with that, because I think there's a point to be made about the fact that the messenger is by no means a perfect messenger. She is a woman who is going to be read by the audiences of the time as a bit of a termagant, as like a shrew, not as someone who people are actually necessarily going to be inclined to take moral messages from.
Right. I mean, to continue the comparison, she's the real housewife who you might find funny or like engaging or entertaining, but you aren't necessarily going to be like, ah, yes, this is the woman that I should be emulating and looking to for like guidance on what women deserve.
Yeah. Maybe this says something about like how society treats women and even how other women treat women, but Kris Jenner could probably say the wisest thing in the world and I wouldn't fucking listen because she's Kris Jenner. Like
Yeah. Exactly. Well, it would be the heartbreaking worst person you know makes a great point meme.
Oh god, yes. But you know, it's funny. People like spend a lot of time trying to recuperate Chaucer as like a feminist figure, a figure whose like misogyny can be just kind of ignored. For years, there was a big thing about the fact that there's this this question that kind of lingered over Chaucer for a long time about whether or not he had raped this woman named Cecily Champon.
Oh.
Because of an indemnity that was entered into one of the courts where she released him from any like financial obligation or liability going forward for any suit relating to her raptus, this Latin word raptus, in exchange for a fixed payment.
Oh.
For years, this was debated because this Latin term raptus can mean all sorts of things. It can mean rape. It can also mean capture. Some people suggested that this was part of things that would often happen, like the whole thing with Chaucer's own aunt kidnapping him, that this may not have had anything to do with rape, but that, you know, could have been an attempt to get her to marry someone in his family or something like that. And then early last year, a scholar whose name I cannot remember, and I feel very guilty about that, gave a presentation about recently discovered records from the British Library, court records and whatnot, that showed that what this actually was a labor case Chaucer was being accused of raptus, of seizure, by another man who had employed Cecily Champollion as a member of his household, as a working domestic labor in his household, and Chaucer had basically poached her, had offered her more money, and she had come into his household to work for him, and Chaucer and Cecily both were sued for violating the terms of the labor contract under which she had worked for this other guy. And so that was the raptus, that was the seizure, was this unlawful seizure of her service from another man.
How dare you?
Which was very interesting.
How dare you poach my maidservant? Okay.
Well, and so that's the thing, exactly. This, like, how dare you poach my maidservant is, like, I feel like a point that a lot of people lost. One, you got a lot of people who were like, see, Chaucer wasn't a rapist. He was great. He was great to women. Like, no, stop reading his books. Don't read The Legend of Good Women. No, we proved he wasn't a rapist. That means he was good. I feel like people also ignored the way in which what this whole case showed, even when it was finally revealed, was still a bunch of men in a courthouse arguing over who owned a woman.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's funny to me, both the gender and the class of that anecdote, because it reminds me of the increasing numbers of entry-level jobs that are starting to institute non-competes.
Yeah.
It's really bad for whatever reason in the brewing industry. A lot of people have to sign non-competes for these jobs where they're paying $15 an hour. And yeah, that's just a bunch of rich dudes with their version of a non-compete fighting over a woman's body and ability to make money. So that's nice.
Yeah, but he didn't rape her, and that is the only thing that matters when we're talking about whether someone is a feminist hero or not.
Right, and because what's of the utmost importance with all medieval literature is that the writers of the medieval literature be feminist heroes, because that is a thing that is both possible and normal to want.
Yeah. So the wife of Bath finishes up, and the friar is called on to give a tale. And so here we get back into a pair of tales, like in our Fragment 1, that are working at the sort of task of quiting one another.
Okay.
So a really important thing to remember as we talk about the friar and the summoner is that both of them are men who are essentially in the business of church-sanctioned extortion in a battle of hypocrisies over which of them is a bad, ungodly man.
Okay. Uh-huh. Yeah. Good.
So I want to actually introduce both characters and then the stories. So on the one hand, we have Brother Hubert. Hubert is a friar in a mendicant order. Mendicants, for listeners who may not know, are like monks, except instead of living lives of prayerful seclusion, they go out into the world and live lives of poverty and begging on behalf of the poor. You have 4 big orders in the Middle Ages. You have the Franciscans, who are like the original friars. You have the Dominicans, the Carmelites, and the Augustinians. Hubert is not described as being particularly a member of any order. He's kind of a stand-in for all of them. And he is what's known as a limitor, which is someone who has a fixed area in which he is the only person who is licensed by the church to beg for alms.
Oh, so they have little territories? Like
not
buskers?
all of them. Yeah, not all of them, but he does. He is also licensed to take confession and to grant absolution and perform marriages, which tells us that he is also a priest. Not all friars are priests, but friars can be priests. He is very worldly. He's described as being an easy man to give penance. There is he wished to have a good pittance. So, he only performs his religious duties for people who pay alms. And this is where the sort of extortion comes in.
Ah.
He's depicted as being a very good member of his order in that he is very successful at begging. He will always get something off someone, even if they have nothing. There's a bit where it says, "For though a widow had nocht a shoe, so pleasant was his in principio, yet would he have a fair thing ere he went." So even if a widow didn't have shoes on her feet, he would sermonize until she gave him a farthing.
So he's a used car salesman, is what you're...
Yes.
He's just a churchy used car salesman. Good.
Very much so. And that's there are several characters who are like that. The pardoner even more so. So, of course, the problem is those alms never really seem to reach the people they're benefiting. The friar is wanton and merry. He likes to sing and play the lute. He likes women. He wears nice clothes, much nicer clothes than a friar should be wearing. He's fat. He's clearly getting good meals. He is nothing that a friar is supposed to be, but he is very much the popular image of what friars had become in England. You know, this was the friars were one of the biggest groups that people in the Reformation were very opposed to. And many of the earliest and sort of most potent preachers of the Reformation were friars who themselves had become displeased with how the friaries operated and became Protestants.
Oh.
The summoner, on the other hand, is an officer, he's a layman, who works for the ecclesiastical courts, the church courts. So these are the courts that try people for heresy. These are the courts who try people for anything that falls under the jurisdiction of religious rather than civil law. The summoner's job is to issue subpoenas and citations to order people to appear before the ecclesiastical courts or to pay fines. And unsurprisingly, he abuses this power. He writes trumped-up citations, he gives people bogus subpoenas, he extorts people to pay him money in order to get out of the trouble that he has created for them. Or when people legitimately have fines, he levies excess fines and he pockets the difference.
You mean the low-key church cop is abusing his power?
Yeah, like, who'd have
shocked.
thought? He's also described as being physically ugly. He's covered in boils that have been interpreted variously as either leprosy or syphilis.
Mm-hmm.
It's also implied he has an inappropriate relationship with the pardoner.
Oh, okay.
Who the pardoner, who we'll get to, I think, in a couple fragments, is also described as being sort of very effeminate. So there's a whole thing going on there.
Interesting.
He also carries a loaf of bread as a shield, which is there's been various interpretations of that, and I don't know what's going on there.
Is that some kind of medieval joke, the point of which didn't quite translate down the ages?
I think it might be. So what the friar and the summoner do is they basically exchange tales about shitty members of the other one's profession. So the friar starts in, and he tells a story about a dishonest, extortionist summoner who meets an outlaw in Lincoln Green, and a friend of mine, Emily Yori, who's a wonderful scholar of outlaw literature, gets very annoyed at the fact that people are like, oh, he's an outlaw and he's wearing Lincoln Green, he's Robin Hood, despite nothing else to link the two characters.
I'm sorry, Emily, I promise we won't do this.
Yes, we won't. He is not Robin Hood. He is the devil. He does quickly reveal this to the summoner. He's like, yeah, I'm the devil. And also, huge fan, man. I suck, but you suck even more. I love your work.
Oh my God. All right. Yeah.
Tell you what, let's travel together. Let's see what we can get people on the road to give us. And whatever they offer to either of us, we'll split between us.
Huh.
So they traveled on the road a ways, and they stumble on a man whose horse cart is stuck in the mud. And he's cursing at the horses, get up, get out of the mud. And he says to them, the fiend you fetch, body and bones, the devil have ye, both horse and cart and hay. And the summoner's like, all right, take his horses and his cart. He said the devil take them. They're yours. And the devil's like, nah, man, he didn't mean that. It's about what's in your heart, it's about what you mean.
I like that Satan himself is like, no, that's too pedantic.
No, I mean, that's the thing, is like Satan is the far more ethical character in this tale. So they go down the road a little bit more, and the summoner, like, they come on this woman that the summoner has extorted before, and he's like, oh, I'm going to extort her again. And he's like, give me a bunch of money and also that frying pan you've got, or I'm going to take you to court. And this woman, who is absolutely sick of this dude, is like, the devil take you too if you don't repent your evil ways.
Uh-oh.
And the devil is just like, see, she meant that. And your ass ain't never repenting. So I guess you're mine. And he drags the summoner to hell. He drags the frying pan to hell too. The poem is very explicit about this. That he's dragged body and soul and the frying pan too to hell.
Damn you and your frying pan to hell. Amazing.
Exactly.
Oh my god.
Now, obviously, the summoner is like, listen here, bitch. He's like, whatever, I'm going to tell a story about a friar. He actually tells a couple stories. He doesn't entirely understand how the game works. He tells a short story in the prologue, and then he tells his actual tale, and then, like, within the tale, there are a couple tales within tales. But so he has this short story in the prologue that I love. It's one of, I think, one of the most vivid and enduring comic images from the tale.
Ooh.
He talks about a friar who is taken by an angel bodily to hell. This is a common motif. Dante does this. This is the, like, being taken to see the horrors of hell in order to, you know, put you on the straight and narrow. He's taken to hell by an angel, and he looks around at all the tormented souls, and he sees that there aren't any friars. And he asks the angel about it, and there's this wonderful bit. No, sirrah, quoth he, han frères switch a grass, that none of him shall come to this place? Yes, quoth this angel, many a million, and unto Satanas he lot him down. And now hath Satanas, saith he, a tail, broader than of a carrack is the sail. Hold up thee tail, thou Satanas, quoth he, show forth thine heirs, and let the friars say, where is the nest of friars in this place? An air that hath a fair long way of space, richt so as bees, out swarmed from an heave, out of the devil's heirs they're gonna drive. 20,000 friars on a rote, and throughout hell swarmed all about, and coming again as fast as they may gone, and in his heirs they crept in every chone. So this wonderful, vivid image of Satan with a butthole full of friars.
Okay, I was like, I did not catch all of that, but I definitely caught, like, there are lots of friars here, and they are in Satan's ass, and I'm, okay, good, yes. That's one
basically the angel takes him to Satan. He's like, Satan, man, lift up your tail. And under Satan's tail, out of his ass, just like pouring out like bees, are all these friars, and they come out and they run around hell, and they run back into his ass, and that's where they live.
That's one friar storage system you can go with.
So,
oh my god!
So this also should be a sign of things to come. There's a lot of butthole based humor in the Summoner's Tale. So the Summoner's actual tale is about a friar who goes to a town in Yorkshire where he has often gone to give sermons and to beg. And he goes to the house of a man that he knows there, named Thomas. He's at Thomas's house. He's eating all of his wife's cooking. Like, he comes in, he basically, like, orders breakfast. He's like, I'll take 20 sausages, a dozen eggs, a flagon of ale. Could you make French toast? Do you have French toast? Yeah, make French toast. Just like if you wanted to make something for a starving man of God, like, I'll take the half stack of pancakes. So he's there. He's eating all the food. He's drinking all the beer. And Thomas is like, look, I'm sorry. Also, Thomas is like ill. He's been ill for some time. He's like, I'm sorry, I don't have any money to give you because I've been making donations to other friars. And the friar's like, well,
Hello.
this is why you're sick, because you're not donating enough to my friary, and so God's punishing you.
Oh my God.
And also, like, why are you donating to other friars? Why aren't you just giving money to me? And there's this wonderful line, what is a fair thing worth parted in 12? So what is a farthing worth parted in 12? But keep in mind that fair thing, because we're about to have some fun wordplay here.
Ooh.
He launches into a couple sermons. And these are the like smaller tales within tales that I won't get into because they're not that interesting. But he launches into a couple sermons, and Thomas finally is like, oh my God, fine. Shut up. I will give you a donation, but only if you agree to share it with the other friars. And the friars are like, all right, fine. Yeah, whatever. Cool. Thomas is like, all right, well, it's in my back pocket. I'm sitting on it, but I'm sick. I can't roll over. Like, just reach on back there and get it out of my pocket for me, would you?
Oh my God.
So the friar, because he's a dumbass and he's very greedy, he reaches back
Oh God.
into behind Thomas's backside, and Thomas farts into his hand.
Uh-huh.
So the best part of this, though, is that the friar's biggest concern is like, how am I supposed to split this fart to share with the other friars? And so we had that line, what is a fair thing worth parted in 12? And it's worth noting that fair thing, a farthing, and fair thing, farting, in Middle English are more or less identical in pronunciation. So,
oh my God.
what is a farting worth divided in 12?
What a pun.
So he goes to the local baron and complains, and he's like, one, that man farted in my hand. But more importantly, how am I supposed to split this fart up with my fellow friars? There's no way to divide a fart. And the baron's squire is like, hey man, I've got an idea. You give me some nice clothes in payment, and I'll tell you how you can split it up. And so he does. And the baron squire is like, all right, take a wagon wheel with 12 spokes.
Oh my God.
And have each of the other friars stick their nose at the end of a spoke. Then you sit on it and fart. The spokes will carry the fart
What the fuck?
out to the other friars.
That
way everyone gets the shit. I know, this is
so scientific. It's so weird. It's such careful.
I think this is probably Chaucer's weirdest story in the Canterbury Tales.
It's very strange. It's also like peak 13-year-old boy humor. Down, like, not just the farting in the hand, but down to like the need to then scientifically divide the fart. Like, that is a middle school boy. Pitch perfect.
And the funny thing is, like, this is the type of, like, this is probably based on an existing fablio called, I want to say, just The Friar and the Wheel. And, like, these were, like, the stories that were immensely popular. Like, these were the stories that, like, you would tell in the pub while everyone was drunk, which I think just goes to show that just like now, full-grown men and 13-year-old boys have no difference between them.
Yep. Oh my God.
But then I also wonder how much we can judge as we're also here laughing at it.
That is true. I mean, I guess that's the thing, right? Pub humor is pub humor all the way through time, and I'm not above laughing at a fart on a wagon wheel.
No. So the thing that I think is really interesting is, like, with both these tales, we've got a couple things that are kind of at play with, like, the kind of religious critique between the two of them. Is one, there's this comment that the devil makes to the summoner in the friar's tale about, like, it being about intent, that I think is, like, kind of coming through the story to be a critique of both the actual summoner and the actual friar, and also the pardoner, and really most of the religious figures in the Canterbury Tales, other than the parson. That your religion can't just be a front. It can't just be this thing that is about, like, appearances and seemings. It's about what's in your heart. There's also this, like, comment on the sort of, like, avariciousness of the members of the church, in that somehow even when a man has farted in his hand, what the friar is more concerned about than anything is that he get his fair share.
Right. That's so funny.
But yeah, and so that is Fragment 3.
All right. Farts and all. Oh, God. Well, so what are our closing thoughts on Fragment 3?
Oh, God. One thing I think that is interesting about Fragment 3 is it does show the way in which Chaucer is constantly in this balancing act over like wanting to genuinely be a moralizer and wanting to be an entertainer. Because the thing about like the Tale of Constance is that I do think he takes the Tale of Constance seriously. There's a lot of debate that happens in like literary critical circles that wants to read most things in Chaucer as like ironic, that wants to always like uncover kind of underlying meanings and whatnot. And a friend of mine, Josie Rahim, who is a scholar now at Princeton, formerly at UNC, is very fond when it comes to Chaucer of being like, could we ever just trust Chaucer and what he says? Could we ever trust that he's earnest about things?
Yeah, why not?
Because, like, otherwise I wouldn't have a job. It's the literary critic's job to uncover meaning. But I think at times it can be the thing that, like, gets people into that whole, like, the curtains are just blue mode that people get obsessed with.
Yeah, that's not my favorite.
One of the things that has led some people to want to identify the man of law with Gower is that part of, I believe it was Confessio Amantis, was dedicated in the first recension, the first version of it, to Chaucer. And then later, that dedication disappeared. Some people think it was just an editing error. Other people have suggested that Gower, who was part of Chaucer's literary circle and so would have been reading parts of the Canterbury Tales as they were being written, really objected to some of Chaucer's more bawdy tales. And so Chaucer offered a more moral tale put forward by this figure of the man of the man of law as a sort of conciliation, a sort of conciliatory gesture towards Gower. And one of the things about Chaucer late in life is that he eventually wrote a redaction in probably the last year of his life in which he like apologized for the more sort of immoral and bawdy tales of the Canterbury Tales and basically told people like you should only take to heart the ones that are beneficial to your moral well-being. That's what you should focus on. And this is the thing that, talking to Josie about Chaucer, that especially she likes to be like, why can't we just take him seriously on this? Why do we need to consider this to be something where, he's just kind of like trying to shunt blame for the bawdiness off, but he's not really sorry for it, or any of the other kind of double speak that we associate. And why can't we just assume that this is a man at the end of his life, desirous of heaven, looking back on the things he has done and regretting that he wrote stories that weren't morally advantageous. But certainly through the writing of the Canterbury Tales, I think we see him trying to balance, like, on the one hand, stories that are fun and that people want to read, with stories that are morally advantageous. And this is something that will come up with the fact that, regardless of the order, the last tale of the Canterbury Tales is the Parson's Tale, which is, not actually a tale so much as it is a penitential manual. And so it's this like sobering moment in which everyone's like, all right, but now we're like here at the shrine of Thomas à Becket, and it's time to get right with God and to like set our minds in a serious set. And then I think we see a lot of Chaucer's interesting relationship with women, as we talked about. And then also, like, this is one of a couple fragments that gets pointed to when it's suggested that Chaucer might have been a Lollard or had some sympathy with the Lollards.
Oh, what are the Lollards for those of us who may not be?
Sorry. For some reason, sorry, I thought we talked about Lollardy last time, and then I'm like, no, I don't think we did. So the Lollards are kind of a very loose knit group. The term Lollard means like sort of like drooler or like ditherer. It's just sort of like a term for someone who just kind of rambles stupidly. So it was not a term that the Lollards used to describe themselves. It was a term that was kind of applied to them.
Mm-hmm.
Lollards were loosely the followers of John Wycliffe and his teachings, which Wycliffe was a English cleric in the mid to late 14th century who had a lot of criticisms about the way the church operated. He had criticisms about the sort of position of wealth. He had criticisms about the concept of transubstantiation. And he spawned a religious movement who he never like actually led them. Like these were just people inspired by his writings. And there have actually been people who suggested that Wycliffe was much more orthodox than his beliefs would kind of be made by the Lollards. He inspired this religious group who were seen as sort of proto-Protestant. There's a lot of debate about how much they did or didn't influence the later English Reformation, but they rejected a lot of things like holy orders. They rejected friars and nuns. They believed in consubstantiation rather than transubstantiation. So the idea that like the bread and wine just represent Christ, but they aren't like
Literally.
substantially Christ.
Right.
They rejected the practice of like chantries that prayed for the souls of the deceased, all sorts of things. And there's been a lot of debate about the level of sympathy that Chaucer did or didn't have for Lollard critiques. There's a lot of debate about generally how much sympathy people did and didn't have for Lollard critiques.
I mean, when you were talking through it, it reminds me a lot of, I don't know, even just from the Canterbury Tales, the church is in this era pretty self-evidently corrupt. At least a lot of its representatives are pretty self-evidently corrupt, and it feels like, much like right now, kind of even centrist liberals can look at the system and be like, this is a bad system. And some people are like, well, we need to improve the system. And some people are like, we need to dismantle the system. But everyone can kind of look at it and be like, this is not working great. And I don't know.
Yeah,
feels like...
and I think it's a very apt comparison, because I think the biggest problem that a lot of people had with the Lollards were that they were seen as extremist. And like in the early years, the Lollards managed to survive fairly okay. Technically, some of their beliefs were considered heretical, but there wasn't a ton of early persecution of Lollards. Several prominent members of Henry IV's court were Lollards.
Oh.
The big kind of turning point came about when a group of prominent Lollards revolted against the king.
Oh.
And that really sort of more political act than anything then got turned into a cause for religious persecution. And after that position and the kind of fall of the Lollard Knights, as they were known, Lollardy was a lot less tolerated in medieval England.
Yeah, they really don't like it when you do stuff like that. They get big mad.
No, it's definitely generally frowned upon.
So he's critiquing the church, but definitely not necessarily being like, disassemble it from the top down.
No, I don't think so. Especially because, I mean, the one character of the church who really is depicted in positive terms is the, humble country parson who is a member of the established church of the time. So I think Chaucer is much more like, be more like this guy. I think Chaucer maybe even allows for the idea that friars and monks and nuns could be like what they're supposed to be. He's just very much critiquing hypocrites who aren't.
Yeah, which is fair and also pretty timeless. Not that we have any churches or representatives of churches today that are being hypocritical or horrible or abusive of their power. I mean, that's we left all those problems behind centuries ago.
Yeah, no, I mean, the Reformation really fixed everything.
And now it's perfect.
Well, there's actually a very real discussion about, what one of the biggest things that the Lollards objected to that would then later become an objection of the Reformation as well. And again, there's this big question of whether the two were particularly intellectually linked or if they just happen to have similar beliefs, which would be a whole nother episode. But there's an argument to be made about the way in which the downfall of the holy orders of like nuns and monks and whatnot in England after the Reformation led to a massive reduction in the sort of relative position of women in English society. Because you have, and I mean, this is something, you have a slow reduction in like the early Middle Ages and like the Anglo-Saxon period. Women who go into nunneries can be, in fact, very powerful figures, in part because you still have these like combination priories that have both monks and nuns that can be led by a prior, but can also be led by a prioress. And you have some very powerful prioresses, some very powerful women who lead communities of religious figures. Many of them are like princesses, second daughters of royal families and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Who then kind of have their power nerfed when like you see some church reforms that make it so that only men can be in charge of men in the church. So you no longer have prioresses who are over monasteries, but you still have prioresses ruling over nunneries. And you still have the nunnery as this place that women who sort of want to live outside of patriarchal society can kind of go and live in a society of women. And the loss of that is both the loss of this female-dominated subset of society and also a loss for many, many centuries of one of the only real positions of power that women could hold in medieval England.
Dang. Yeah, that's a huge bummer. I had never thought about it that way, but that's fascinating. And yeah, I mean, I did know that nunneries and things were like a huge refuge for women and educated women, but I hadn't thought about the fact that the Reformation would have taken so much of that away.
Yeah. This is always the thing anytime we get into like Protestantism and its complaints about the Catholic Church is it's always just one long story of people identifying one problem and fixing it in a way that creates another one. It's the what's that bit from the Good Place with like every time I had a problem I threw a Molotov cocktail and boom I had a different problem.
I mean, that's the problem with having a society, I think. Were there any other big things you wanted to make sure you like touched on, danced around?
I think that's it. Like any of the Canterbury Tales, like there are so many little themes that we could go into, so many little bits and pieces that people have picked at over the years, like why the summoner wears a garland of oak leaves or whatnot. But I think we've really hit on the like high points.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, I will spend the rest of the week thinking about Satan having an asshole full of friars.
It's really I want to say I'm trying to remember who it was. I want to say someone did a painting of this at some point.
Oh my god!
And
I hope so.
Oh yes, it's Pasolini, the Italian director Pier Pasolini did an adaptation of the Canterbury Tales for his Trilogy of Life series, which also included, I think, an adaptation of the Decameron. Of course, he took all the raunchiest bits and also like the gayest bits he could find because, he was very much that he loved like the taboo. In his Canterbury Tales, there is a scene of like all the friars coming out of the devil's ass that is quite comic. If you could ever get a hold of it,
I'll at least see if I can find like a clip or a screen grab. That's amazing.
I just want to point out I was I was trying to find out if I could find the film of the Canterbury Tales online, which I did on X videos with the tags ass BBW. That's if you want to watch the Canterbury Tales, you know where to find it and how to find it.
Oh my god.
I don't know how much of that you're gonna have to bleep out.
All right. Well, with that, I think maybe we've done it for the day. That's the high point. It'll only be downhill from here. Wow, and Marjorie didn't even join us this time. I'm disappointed.
She's been yelling around in the background, but then her brother decided to start a fight, and
fair.
Now they're off upstairs beating each other up.
Maybe she decided that after hosting last time, she's done for a while. She's a little shy of the limelight, you know? It was a lot of attention all at once, and it made her anxious. Well, Toni, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me again. I look forward to doing our next few fragments.
Yeah, me too. Is there anything you would like to plug? Anywhere you would like people to find you? Any closing dramatic statements you would like to make?
I mean, the usual. You can find my hot takes on dumb things on Twitter at MotherFoolian. If anyone happens to be at the International Congress on Medieval Studies this summer in May, I'll be giving a presentation on the Squire's Tale and performance and ritual in the construction of knighthood at a panel entitled Ritual Performance in the Middle Ages or something like that. I'll also be giving a presentation on right-wing medievalisms and the trope of the knight in right-wing memes.
That sounds awesome. I want to come to that. Well, yeah, you heard the lady. Find her on Twitter if you want her hot takes. If you are the medievalism conference attending kind of person, go see what she has to say and send her very good vibes as she attempts to write the dissertation that we have all decided she has to write now because it sounds too good to miss.
I ain't doing You can't make me. My committee can, though. They pay me.
That's true. That is kind of important.
The university who pays my bills can make me do it.
All right. Well, send the good vibes. And we'll be back to do more Canterbury Tales at some point. We'll be back next week with I'm not sure what because I'm behind on my scheduling. And thank you all out there so much for joining us today. I had a lot of fun. I appreciate you being here with us. And as always, if you can, this week, this month, this pay period, consider supporting a living author or academic because they could really use the love. Bye. Didn't Read It was created, written, recorded, and edited by me, Grace Todd. You can follow the show on Instagram or Twitter at Didn't Read It.
Our theme song is Books, written, performed, and recorded by William Albritton.
For sources cited and a full list of episodes, you can visit us at didntreaditpod.com.
If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review. It makes a big difference, and we appreciate it immensely.
If you did not enjoy the show, we are accepting applications for a full-time nemesis at didntreaditpod@gmail.com. Special thanks to Black Iris Social Club in Richmond, Virginia, and to Pesca Trio Publishing.